Hello YouTube and welcome back to another video. Today we are tier ranking every single NBA or every single one of the 50 states starting 5 with all-time NBA players. We are using the rosters from Kenny2, KOT4Q's second channel. KOT4Q, one of the best 2K YouTubers there are. Be sure to go leave a like and subscribe to this video on his second channel, Kenny2. Today we are going to be tier ranking all the teams with his starting 5s. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you are new. And let's get it started. I think he's just going to go over the
we are
rules
tier ranking
here at the beginning.
tier ranking
I watched this video
but
through
I hit
all
my
the way
guy
to
Jonathan
Indiana
up
and I stopped
and
watching
said, hey,
it to come make this video.
So starting off with Alabama, they got Jeff Malone.
This is actually my third take on this video, so be sure to leave a like and subscribe for all my hard work. And here we go. Alabama. They have a really good starting 5. I've said this now 3 times, but Jeff Malone, he is on the all-time Washington Wizards. He was a great point guard. Really good, just ball handler, old school point guard. He was on those 90s and 80s teams on the Washington Wizards. He was a really good player. He does not fit this team very well, but Gerald Wallace, great 3-and-D player. He would fit perfect next to the other guys on here. George McGinnis, top 20 scorer in NBA history. Wallace, a one-time All-Star. Jeff Malone, a couple All-Stars. These stars next to their names does mean that they're Hall of Famers. So McGinnis, a Hall of Famer, and he's top 20 in NBA scoring ever. Charles Barkley, he's a Hall of Famer. He was also an MVP and one of the greatest rebounders in NBA history. And Ben Wallace, a multi-time Defensive Player of the Year and a Hall of Famer. So Alabama, we're going to throw them in the C tier. Just because I've seen up to Indiana and Alabama wouldn't stand a chance.
Not that player objective, all right? And we who has played many positions in his career is probably when we get to Ohio's.
So KOT4Q put Alabama in the A tier.
They got Mario
Chalmers.
Chalmers
Put him in the S tier. Hold on, forgot.
From Alaska.
Okay, so Kenny put Alabama in his A tier. We put them in our C tier. We had to add the S tier. I forgot to add them. Alaska, they're the reason we have this whole tier down here at incomplete. They don't even have a full starting 5. Mario Chalmers, he's a solid point guard in NBA history. He was a multi-time champion. But him and Dyshawn Nix, they're not beating any of these teams on here. Except for maybe Idaho, which you will see in a little bit.
From A to F.
That team's just not good. Arizona here. Jared Bayless is the point guard. He played about 10 years in the NBA. Was a solid player, had a good jump shot, good playmaker. But he's not really a guy that you would want starting on any team. He never really averaged like 10 points a game. Matisse Thybulle never has had a jump shot. He was a first-round pick in 2019, and he's one of the best defenders in the NBA on the Portland Trail Blazers. Probably going to make a couple all-defensive teams, but he is not a great player to be in a starting 5 for an all-state team. Sean Elliott, he was a great player on the San Antonio Spurs in the 80s and 90s, but him here, he is just not. He's the first scoring option on an all-state team, and this Arizona team, I thought they would be better. They've had a great, and I mean they've been really good with Arizona University and Arizona State. So I thought that a lot of those guys would be from there. Like I thought Richard Jefferson was from Arizona, but I guess not. Mark Allari, I have no idea who that is. Marvin Bagley, he was a 5-star recruit, but he just has not really panned out in the NBA very well. Arizona is definitely going to be our first D tier here. They're just not a great team here.
And I swear, she did. Wow, played and recognized the for her month. His name is D. Player.
Next up here we have Arkansas, and this is one of my favorite starting 5s in this whole video that I've watched so far. Mike Conley is the point guard. He has an old school play style. He's a one-time All-Star, one of the best point guards in the NBA in the 2010s. He's a really solid player. Sidney Moncrief is the shooting guard, one of only 3 or 4 players in the history of the NBA to win the Defensive Player of the Year at the guard position. Scottie Pippen, another great defender. He's down here at the power forward, so they have 2 of the best wing defenders in the history of basketball on the same team. And then at the 3, they have Joe Johnson, who can get you a bucket from anywhere on the court. One of the best ISO scorers we've ever seen in basketball history. So you have 2 great wing defenders and the best wing scorer in NBA history, along with a great point guard that can facilitate, get them the ball. And then Joe Barry Carroll, He was the first overall pick in 1980 or something out of Purdue. He's just a good rebounder, good interior defender. Arkansas, I think Kenny in this video ends up putting him in the B tier. We're going to put them in the B tier, but above Alabama. Or no, I put them in the A last time. I'm trying to remember what I did last video. But we put them A and B. Because I really liked, in the first take we got to Connecticut. But, so I really like what I have here with Arkansas, Alabama, Arizona. This is probably my favorite starting five I've seen so far. This team, no explanation needed, they're S tier. Even a casual, if you're a casual NBA fan watching this video, even you probably know every single player on this team except for maybe Tyson Chandler. Jason Kidd's a Hall of Famer. James Harden's an MVP and one of the best scorers in NBA history. Kawhi Leonard's a lockdown defender, two-time Finals MVP. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. Paul Pierce is a Hall of Famer, won a ring. Really good shooter on those Boston Celtics teams. And then Tyson Chandler, he's a Defensive Player of the Year. Also just a really solid big man in NBA history. That team's definitely S, 1,000%.
And we could have 7 different teams.
Next up here, we have the Colorado starting five. This team, I really don't like how it is. It could be worse, as you can see later in the video, but it's just not a good team. Chauncey Billups, he's a brand new Hall of Famer. Great playmaker, good scorer, I guess. He was the Finals MVP on that 2004 Pistons team. But overall, he's just not a great player to be the best player on a all-time team from a single state. But aside from him, you have Derek White at the shooting guard. He just won the championship 2 days ago, I think now. Or maybe it was last night. I don't even remember. But Derek White, really good defender, on ball, perimeter defender. He gives it his all, has great effort. J-Dub at the small forward, former first-round pick out of Santa Clara. He's got a really bright future. If he ends up being like James Harden, like some people are saying, then this team could be up there in the B tier. Bob Dahl, I don't know who that is. And then Jason Smith is just a solid backup center on the Wizards and the New Orleans Hornets for like basically all the 2010s. This Colorado team could be worse, but I think that they're right on par with that Arizona team just because of this front court. The backcourt is really good with these three, but I don't know who that guy is, and this guy was not even an NBA starter. So yeah. Here we have Connecticut. They have Calvin Murphy at the point guard, who is the worst Hall of Famer in NBA history. I was just watching a video. He was like a one-time All-Star, maybe one-time champion. I don't even think he was ever an All-NBA player or All-Defensive player. He somehow made the Hall of Fame, only averaging like 17 and 8 for his career. He is not a good player to be your best player in a starting five challenge like this. Then they have Michael Adams at the shooting guard. He is a really good player. Really underrated all time. I think if I'm thinking right, he was the guy on the Nuggets in the 1980s. He's a really good player. John Williamson, I don't know who that is. Charles Smith, I think he was on like the Bucks and the Trailblazers in the 90s. I don't know anything about him. And Marcus Camby, great rebounder, good defender. But this team's got to be in the F tier. Like if Colorado, with one Hall of Famer, but a better Hall of Famer than Calvin Murphy, and then like even Jason Smith is better than Charles Smith. Bob Dole is way worse than Marcus Camby. Cody Williams is better than John Williamson, and Derek White and Michael Adams is a toss-up. So, yeah.
Adams, John Williamson. I don't know anything about John Williamson. Charles Smith might be the most generic.
Here we have Delaware, who has a pretty decent starting five here. Walt Hazard, I don't know who that is, but I know he looked him up in the video when I was watching it, and I got to Indiana. He was a one-time All-Star that played in the 60s. Dante DiVincenzo is the shooting guard. Really good player. He would average probably 30 on this team. But like being the lead scorer on a team with these guys that aren't going to ever get the ball, DiVincenzo would carry. AJ English, I think if I'm thinking right, he is the guy that played for the Pistons in the 2010s. Joey Graham, former first-round pick out of Oklahoma State. He's not very good. And Jalen Duren, young center with a lot of potential. This team, though, it's got to go down there with Connecticut. Actually, you know what? let's raise up Arizona and Colorado because I know Idaho's coming. And so Connecticut, so Delaware, this team's not terrible. But they might be down there with Idaho. Connecticut's starting 5 was not that bad, but let's put Delaware down in the F tier. Like, in all honesty, this team, they have one guy that can score the ball, one guy that can rebound, one or two guys that can defend really well, and then I guess a playmaker, and then AJ English is just there. Like, they don't have any of those guys on this team. DiVincenzo is their best player, and he's just not a guy in the NBA. Here we have Washington, D.C. This is one of the better starting 5s we have seen all day. They have a starting 5 of Dave Bing, who's a Hall of Famer. He was on the Pistons. I think he might have been on the Cavaliers. I don't know much about his game. I just know he's pretty good. Austin Carr, former first overall pick to the Cavaliers out of Notre Dame. He's a pretty good role player. I know he's really good on the NBA 2K all-time Cavs. Adrian Dantley, one of the top scorers in NBA history. I think he's top 15. Kevin Durant, he's in some people's top 15 players of all time, not just scorers. And then Kermit Washington, all I know about him is he's the guy that destroyed Rudy Tomjanovich's face. So this team, it's basically Bing, Dantley, and KD, and then Carr is a good role player. I don't know anything about Kermit. But this Washington, D.C. team, they have two of the best scorers in NBA history, a really good 3-and-D guy, and a really good just a point guard, just a playmaker who can score the ball when he needs to. This Washington, D.C. team has to be up there with, I think, Alabama. I think Arkansas still has that edge with how well their team is built and how well their players are. But Alabama's in that B tier is not a bad place for this Washington, D.C. team to be. Here we have Florida. This team is really good. They have Gilbert Arenas at the point guard, who's famous for some stuff that's not NBA related. But I think he averaged 28 points a game in a season. He was a great scoring point guard. Also had a bag in him with some playmaking, some handles. T-Mac, one of the greatest scorers in NBA history. Isolation. I said that about Joe Johnson, but it's the same for T-Mac. Just could get to his spots, get his shots off. He's a Hall of Famer. He would be one of the best NBA players of all time if it wasn't for injuries. I guarantee it. Then you have his cousin, Vince Carter, one of the most athletic players in NBA history. He's also a Hall of Famer. Played like 22 NBA seasons. Really solid player. Carried the Raptors in the Nets a couple times. Amari Stoudemire, a great athlete, jump out of the gym guy who was a great player on those Suns teams. And David Robinson, just a super versatile guy. NBA scoring champ one time. This team has to be an S tier. They have everything you could need, from playmaking to scoring. All these guys can score. Rebounding, defense, they have everything. Next up here we have Georgia, where we have Walt Frazier at point guard. He was a legend on those Knicks teams in the 60s, maybe the 70s. I know they won the championship in like 67, so he was on those teams. He's a Hall of Famer. I think he's a good defender, if I'm not thinking of Earl Monroe. Anthony Edwards, probably a future Hall of Famer, really good scorer compared to MJ, of course. Jalen Brown, he has a Finals MVP, so he's probably going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. If Iggy makes it, Jalen Brown's definitely making it. Josh Smith, one of the bounciest players in NBA history. He was a really good role player on those Hawks teams with Al Horford and Jeff Teague. And then Dwight Howard, he's going to be a Hall of Famer one day too. One of the best defenders of the 2010s in the low post, the 2000s too. He was a prime Dwight Howard for the Orlando Magic, was a great player. This team's got playmaking, this team's got scoring, this team's got defense, they've got rebounding, they've got everything you could ever need. And they probably would have a pretty good bench too if he added in bench, 6-man, even that. They've got to be in here with Washington, D.C. and Bama. This is a really solid team. They might even be up there with Arkansas, but I think Arkansas has a slight edge for now at least. Hawaii here, I forgot about them, but they are definitely going to be in this incomplete tier because they're another team with Alaska that would never win a game against any other team on here in this whole list. They are just not good. Cedric Ceballos, I think he won a Most Improved Player in like 1995. He was a really good scorer, but then Red Roca, I do not know who that is. It's basically a one-man show. At least Alaska, I knew both their players. This team, it's a one guy that I know and one guy that I've never heard of in my entire life. This team definitely belongs in the incomplete tier. Here we have Idaho. They have Luke Ridnour, who is just a really solid point guard, former first round pick. I think he was in the lottery in 2003 out of Oregon. He's a really solid, just old school play style point guard, good playmaker, great defender. Deb Smith, I've never heard of him. He has a name from the 60s, so that's probably when he's from. Same thing with Dale Wilkinson, Charlie Black, and Steve Hayes. I think I've heard of Hayes, but the other three I have no idea, and Ridnour is not a good best player to have. They're by far the worst team on here that's not incomplete that I've seen so far, at least. Indiana, the next one, they're the only other one I've seen. Then we're going to get to the surprises. Okay, I misspoke. Illinois is before Indiana, of course. This is by far S tier. Like, we're going to go through it, but they just got to go in S tier first. Isaiah Thomas, Hall of Famer. Great point guard. I think he won a championship, maybe two, with those bad boy Pistons teams in the 80s. I don't know why. I can't remember if he did or did not. Yeah, because Dennis Rodman has one with the Pistons, I think. So, yeah, they won one. Derrick Rose, the youngest MVP in history. Hopefully he'll be a Hall of Famer one day. But Prime D Rose is something else. And they have Dwayne Wade on this team, too, who's a Hall of Famer. Just a great ISO scorer, too. Also, a really good defender for the wing. Anthony Davis, future Hall of Famer. He was on the NBA 75. NBA champion, George Mikan, one of the pioneers of the game of basketball. That team is overpowered by far. Here we are with Indiana, the last team that I know the starting five of. Louis Dampier, I don't remember what team he was on, but he was on one of the NBA 2K all-time teams a couple years ago. He is a Hall of Famer, though, so he can't be that bad. Dick Barnett, he was on those Knicks championship teams I was talking about earlier with Earl Monroe and Willis Reed. Larry Bird, one of the best players in NBA history, so those are their three Hall of Famers. Glenn Robinson, former first overall pick out of Purdue. Just had a solid career. I think he averaged 20 a couple times. And then Zach Randolph, a big body center, who was one of the heart and souls of that Memphis Grizzlies team in the 2010s with Mike Conley and Tony Allen, all them. This Indiana team, it's not great, but I think it is above Arizona and Colorado. It's got to be up there with Georgia. Even though I think Georgia would beat them by a lot, they're most definitely better than Arizona and Colorado. Larry Bird does carry, though. Here we have Iowa with their starting five. This team is not great. Kirk Heinrich is the point guard. He was a lottery pick in 2003 out of the University of Kansas. Had a solid 10-15 year career with the Chicago Bulls and all of them. He was a good point guard, but wasn't really he wasn't ever a good or a great player. Keegan Murray, he's a power forward in real life. They have him at shooting guard in this Iowa lineup. He's a great scorer. I didn't realize he was from Iowa. I guess it makes sense since that's where him and his brother went to college. But not a great shooting guard to have, especially since that's not his real position. Harrison Barnes, NBA champion. Just a really solid scorer. Rafe LaFrentz, a former probably top 5 pick, I think, out of the University of Kansas. They have 3 guys from the University of Kansas. That's wild. LaFrentz didn't have a very long career. He's a pretty okay player. And Nick Collison played his whole career in OKC. Another 2003 lottery pick on this team out of the University of Kansas. Just a solid player. Never was really that good. Iowa's got to be probably with Connecticut, I think. But yeah, not a great team, not a good team. Next up, we have Kansas, and this team is just not good. I feel like they should put Alvin Adams at the power forward since he's only like 6'9" and start Willie Cauley-Stein. But even then, it would not make that much of a difference. I don't know who Warren Jabali is. I know Lucius Allen won a championship or 2 with the Milwaukee Bucks back when they had Kareem and the Big O. So he's pretty decent. Scott Wedman, I know he's in 2K. I don't know where he's from. Leonard Gray, I don't know. We're just going to do what I said, though. Alvin Adams, this is Alvin Adams right here. Willie Cauley-Stein. Alvin Adams, I thought he was a Hall of Famer, but I guess not. He was a really good player for the Suns in the 70s. I don't know much about his play style, but I know I read a book about him in like 3rd grade, and he was pretty good scorer, I think. And then Willie Cauley-Stein, 5th overall pick in 2015 out of Kentucky. A really good back-to-the-basket big man. Couldn't ever find a spot in the NBA just because of his old-school style of play. Kansas, unfortunately, that's a state I've been to a lot, but F tier. It's got to be, unfortunately. Kentucky here, they have the guy that went to Kentucky at point guard, Rajon Rondo, a 2-time champion because he won one with the Lakers and with the Celtics. Allen Houston at the shooting guard. I thought he was a Hall of Famer, but I guess not. Really good player on those 90s, 2000s Knicks. Cliff Hagan, he's a Hall of Famer. Former Atlanta Hawk. Joe Fulks, I know he used to play for the Warriors, I think. He's a Hall of Famer. And Dave Cowens, he's an MVP and a Hall of Famer. Played for the Boston Celtics. This Kentucky team, they're not great. But I think that they have 3 Hall of Famers. They got to be up there with Indiana and all them. And just while we're at it, I think Washington, D.C.'s got to move up to the A tier. Just because this B tier is getting stacked, they're the one that really stands out the most. This Kentucky team is good, but 2 of these Hall of Famers are from a long, long time ago. Don't know anything about them. So that's kind of the reason why they're so low. Now we have Louisiana. And this team is actually really tough. They have De'Aaron Fox at the point guard, who's I think, 1-time All-Star right now. But he's a really good, kind of shown some flashes of Russell Westbrook type player. So De'Aaron Fox is the point guard. At the shooting guard, they have Hall of Famer Clyde Drexler, who is a champion with the Rockets, I think. He was on those 2 teams between Michael Jordan retiring and coming back in 94 and 95 or whenever. Marquise Johnson, I know he was on the Bucks. I just don't know the time frame. Karl Malone, top 5 scorer in NBA history. A very unliked player, but he is pretty solid all time. He's never won a championship, but I think he's an MVP once or twice and everything. So he's a really good player. And then Bill Russell, one of the greatest players in the history of the NBA, top 4, top 5 in most people's rankings. Just a really old player, but he's also really, really, really good at rebounding and defense, especially. This team, Louisiana, gotta go in the A. They have everything you could ever want. Great scorers with Fox and Malone. Great defense with Johnson and Russell. Rebounding with Russell and Malone. Playmaking with Fox. They just got a really well-balanced team. Next up, we have Maine. And this Maine team, I thought that they would have a couple guys, but of course, incomplete tier. Duncan Robinson, their best player, and then Jeff Turner. I know he's in 2K. I could not tell you what team he's played for. Robinson's got to average 50 points a game on this team, though. I can tell you that. With that green light to shoot, oh my gosh. But this team just not good. Of course, you know Duncan Robinson, Jeff Turner, I couldn't tell you much about, but they're in the incomplete tier. Next up, we have Maryland here, and this is actually a really solid team. Steve Francis, well, they have no Hall of Famers. We'll just say that right now, but they are just a solid group of high-level role players, some stars. Steve Francis was an all-star a couple times, was on the Rockets. He was a really good player next to Yao Ming before they got T-Mac. Victor Oladipo, most improved player, I think he's a 2-time all-star. Was amazing, but before he had that injury to his knee, he was probably going to be an All-NBA first or second team guy like this year by now. Reggie Lewis, before he tragically died, I think he was a champion and he was a multi-All-NBA team guy. I don't know how he's not in the Hall of Fame yet. I thought he was pretty decent. Jeff Green, he's one of the best role players in NBA history, in my opinion. Jeff Green, he can get a bucket. He's a good rebounder, good defender. And then Marvin Webster, I have no idea who that is. But Maryland, I think they're in the same boat as Colorado. I like Arizona. gotta go down. Massachusetts here, this team, not very good. They have Dana Barros, Bruce Brown, Pat Connaughton at the power forward, and Bill Laimbeer. I don't know how Laimbeer is not a Hall of Famer, but it's just a bunch of good role players. I think Massachusetts got to go D tier, even though they would win a couple games against some of those lower tier guys. Bruce Brown and Bill Laimbeer is a tough duo. This Michigan team is amazing. One of the best players in NBA history at point guard. Devin Booker, future Hall of Famer. George Gervin, top 20 of all time. Chris Webber, top 50 of all time. And Mel Daniels, top 50 of all time, too. He's a Hall of Famer, too. 4 Hall of Famers and 1 future Hall of Famer. That team is definitely A tier. They'd give Florida a run for their money, I think, in a 7-game series. Next up, we have Minnesota, and they've got a good 3-and-D point guard, Jalen Suggs, but don't know who Garmaker is. Devian George was always just a bench player, never even was a starter. Kevin McHale, one of the best NBA players of all time, most underappreciated. And then Chet Holmgren, so they have a great 3 and then 2 guys that should not be on any team's starting 5, so they're kind of in the same boat as Colorado. I think they belong in that C tier. Next up here we have Mississippi. They have Mohamed Abdul Rauf at the point guard, one of the best shooters in NBA history. Didn't play very long though. Monte Ellis, a good scorer, could also play make a little bit. Chet Walker, he just died a couple months ago, rest in peace. Really good player on some of those 76ers championship teams. He's a Hall of Famer. Spencer Haywood, a Hall of Famer. He averaged like 30 and 10 on a Lakers championship team in the 70s before he got like banned or something. And then Big Al Jefferson, he's a really solid big man. This team's got to be B. They're not as good as some of those teams, but they're a respectable starting 5 nonetheless. Next up here we have Missouri. This is a pretty solid team. They have JoJo White at the point guard. He was a Hall of Famer on the 60s Celtics. Bradley Beal, pretty decent player, multi-time All-Star, 30 points per game in one season. Jason Tatum, future Hall of Famer, NBA champion. David Lee, a really solid role player in the 2010s, late 2000s too. And then Ed McCauley, who's also a Hall of Famer, really solid player for the Hawks and the Celtics. I think he was traded for Bill Russell or something. This team's definitely probably really high C tier. They're the best. I think they're the best C tier team on here, just not as good as some of these B tier teams at all. Next up we have Montana, and they somehow had 5 players. So I'm not going to complain, but their best player here is Phil Jackson, who is a Hall of Famer, just not for his playing career. If you did not know, Phil Jackson did play for the Knicks. And then they have Adam Morrison. They're the only 2 players I know on this whole starting 5. Montana most definitely is an F tier team. Yeah, they're just not good. Adam Morrison's good scorer, I guess, in college at least. And Phil Jackson, I guess, a rebounder on this team, but not a good team at all. Next up here we have Nebraska. This is a pretty solid team. Don't know who Kenny Sailors is, but Fred Hoiberg, a really good coach, was on those Minnesota Timberwolves teams with Kevin Garnett. Bob Boozer, he was on those teams with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Oscar Robertson. Kansas State basketball legend. Chuck Gardner, don't know who he is. And Dave Hoppen, I know, was a pretty solid NBA player. This team, though, is an F tier. Even though Bob Boozer is pretty solid, they just don't have anyone around him.